All right, let's go. Number 8. The Spike Pit. In the jungles of the Pacific, during the island hopping campaigns of 1942 through 1945, Allied soldiers advancing through dense undergrowth learned to fear the ground itself. There was no tripwire, no pressure plate, no mechanical warning of any kind. The ground simply gave way, and the darkness below was waiting. Japanese engineers had spent centuries refining the concept before industrializing it for modern warfare. They dug pits 4 to 6 feet deep, lined the walls and floors with sharpened bamboo stakes hardened in fire until they were nearly as rigid as iron, then concealed the opening with thin matting and a careful layer of natural vegetation. From above, the pit was indistinguishable from the forest floor. That was the entire point. What made the spike pit particularly insidious was its design philosophy. It wasn't built to kill cleanly. A soldier impaled on a bamboo stake might survive, but he would require extraction, medical attention, and the time and effort of the men around him. Many stakes were deliberately coated in animal feces, accelerating infection and dramatically increasing the rate of tetanus and gas gangrene in survivors. The trap was engineered to consume resources, not just lives. Allied field surgeons documented the injuries extensively in their Pacific Theater medical reports. Even soldiers who avoided the stakes directly often suffered severe ankle and leg fractures from the fall. Recovery in the field, weeks from a proper medical facility, was rarely straightforward. U.S. Army engineer units began distributing maps of suspected pit locations, though the jungle offered no guarantee those maps were complete. In remote regions of Papua New Guinea, clearance workers and survey teams reported encountering collapsed pit systems decades after the war ended. The jungle had grown back over them, patient and concealing, the way jungle always does. Some had simply been waiting for the next person to walk the wrong path. Number 7. The Tank Trap. In the winter of 1944, as Allied forces pressed east into Germany along the Siegfried Line, they encountered something their commanders had been briefing them about for months, but that still managed to be worse than expected. The roads were the killing ground, not the fields, not the forests. The roads. The Siegfried Line, or West Wall, was a 390-mile defensive fortification running along Germany's western border, and it had been methodically turned into a layered obstacle course. Dragon's teeth, concrete anti-tank barriers lined the approaches. Anti-tank ditches had been cut across open ground, and buried in the road surfaces and verges, Wehrmacht engineers had placed the Tellermine 42 and its successor, the Tellermine 43, each containing a 12-kilogram TNT charge calibrated to destroy the track assembly of a Sherman tank and kill or maim everyone in the vehicle. The Tellermine was a deliberate, systematic weapon. It required a trigger pressure of between 90 and 180 kilograms, making it largely safe from infantry on foot, which meant clearance teams had to sweep every meter of road by hand before armor could advance. That slowdown was itself part of the trap's purpose. Every hour spent on mine clearance was an hour not spent advancing. Germany's bomb disposal service, the Kampfmittelbeseitigungsdienst, still recovers approximately 2,000 tons of World War II ordnance every year. That figure includes Tellermines found beneath agricultural fields, construction sites, and riverbanks along the former Siegfried Line corridor. Near the city of Aachen, which sat directly on the line, finds continue to surface during road and infrastructure work. Corrosion doesn't disarm a Tellermine. In some conditions, it makes the fuse more sensitive. The Siegfried Line was breached. The war ended. But the mines that defended it were not all removed. They were simply buried deeper as the years passed, waiting beneath a country that has spent 80 years trying to find them all. Number 6. The Sea Mine. In the waters of the North Sea and English Channel, something has been quietly waiting on the seabed since the early 1940s. It doesn't corrode quickly in the cold salt water. It doesn't move much. It simply sits, anchored or resting in the silt, carrying between 150 and 300 kilograms of TNT, and it waits for something to come close enough. Germany deployed an estimated 300,000 naval mines across European waters during the Second World War. The standard EMC moored contact mine was a proven design, floating at a preset depth on a steel cable, armed with a series of Hertz horns that would trigger detonation on contact. They were laid across shipping lanes, harbor approaches, and coastal waters with systematic, devastating efficiency. They sank warships, merchant vessels, and fishing boats throughout the conflict. Post-war clearance operations removed hundreds of thousands of these devices, but the scale of the original deployment made complete clearance impossible. Conservative estimates from the German Navy and NATO ordnance authorities suggest between 50,000 and 100,000 mines remain across European seabeds. They surface regularly, dislodged by currents, anchor chains, storm surges, and the increasing activity of seabed construction. Royal Navy mine threat and ordnance diving units have conducted well over 1,000 disposal operations in UK waters since the year 2000 alone. What has changed in recent decades is the scale of activity disturbing the seabed. North Sea wine farm construction projects, laying cables and driving foundations into the ocean floor, encounter mine-related hazards with regularity. Survey data from major offshore construction operations consistently identifies hundreds of potential ordnance contacts requiring investigation before work can proceed. In 2019, a controlled detonation of a WWII mine off the German coast created a crater 4 meters deep in the seabed floor. Every cable laid on the North Sea floor, every anchor dropped by a passing vessel, every trawler's net dragged through those cold waters moves through a corridor that was deliberately seeded with explosives by careful, methodical engineers. How long before the sea is finally clean? Number 5. The hidden bomb. In the weeks following liberation across France, Belgium, and the Netherlands in late 1944 and into 1945, civilians who had survived years of occupation began returning to their homes. Many of them did not survive the homecoming. As German forces retreated, Wehrmacht engineers were given systematic orders to leave the territory as dangerous as possible for those who followed. Buildings were wired, furniture was rigged, stoves, doors, floorboards, and objects left deliberately in plain sight. Things that looked valuable or useful were connected to stick grenades, S-mines, and tripwires at ankle height across doorways and thresholds. Allied ordnance disposal manuals produced during the final year of the war documented dozens of distinct German booby trap configurations, cataloged from devices found during the advance. The variety was not accidental. Variety meant unpredictability. What made the booby trap program particularly calculated was its targeting logic. It wasn't primarily aimed at soldiers. Soldiers were trained to be suspicious. The traps were arranged to catch the people who came next, the families returning to their kitchens, the children drawn to an unfamiliar object left on a table, the neighbor who tried the door. The safer an object appeared, the more lethal it was likely to be. German engineers had turned domesticity itself into a weapon. Post-war medical and civil records from liberated territories document booby trap casualties continuing into 1946 and 1947. In Belgium and the Netherlands, devices connected to building fixtures have been discovered during demolition work decades after the war. Belgian bomb disposal teams confirmed multiple such finds during structural work in recent years, each one requiring the same careful, methodical approach that Allied sappers used in the rubble of 1945. They weren't trying to stop the Allied advance. The advance had already succeeded. They were trying to make liberation feel like death. In some homes, for some families, on the day they finally came back, it did. Number 4. The Dude Bomb. Cologne, Germany. A construction crew breaks ground on a new development site, and their equipment strikes something solid, roughly 2 meters below the surface. Work stops immediately. Police cordon the area. Within hours, roughly 15,000 residents receive evacuation orders. This sequence of events has become so routine in German cities that municipal authorities have standing protocols for it, printed instructions for precisely this situation, because it happens with regularity across the country. What the crew found was an American 250-kilogram aerial bomb, dropped sometime during the strategic bombing campaign of 1943 or 1944, and it had been sitting there, dormant and loaded, ever since. Allied forces dropped an estimated 2.7 million tons of bombs on Europe during the Second World War. Fuse failure rates across different bomb types and delivery conditions ranged from 10 to 15%. The mathematics are not comforting. Germany's interior authorities estimate that between 100,000 and 300,000 unexploded bombs remain buried across the country. The German Bomb Disposal Service recovers approximately 2,000 tons of this material every year. Official government projections suggest complete clearance will take more than another 100 years at current rates. What makes the aerial bomb particularly harrowing is the behavior of its fuse over time. Fuse mechanisms were engineered for a relatively short operational period. After 8 decades of soil pressure, temperature cycling, and internal corrosion, the mechanical and chemical components of these devices do not move closer to inert. They move closer to instability. A corroded fuse can require significantly less force to trigger than it did when the bomb was dropped. These devices are not fading. They are becoming more sensitive. The evacuations are not rare events. Frankfurt, 2019, 16,000 residents cleared from their homes while disposal teams worked on a 500-kilogram British bomb found near the main rail station. Augsburg, 2016, 54,000 people evacuated in one of the largest post-war civilian displacements in German history because of a bomb that had been in the ground since the RAF dropped it more than 70 years earlier. Germany evacuates cities on a near-weekly basis because of bombs dropped before most of its current population was born. The war ended in 1945. The Ordnance did not get that message. Number 3. The Ruins Mines. Near the town of Tobruk in northern Libya, the desert looks exactly as it has looked for decades. Flat, pale, featureless. There are no signs, no fences, no markers of any kind visible from a distance. There is nothing to suggest that the ground beneath it contains one of the densest concentrations of unexploded ordnance remaining anywhere on Earth. That absence of warning is not an oversight. It is simply the nature of what was left behind. The Western Desert Campaign of 1940 to 1943 was fought across hundreds of miles of North African terrain, and both Axis and Allied forces laid mines on a scale that is difficult to comprehend from a modern distance. Estimates from the Halo Trust and United Nations Mine Action Service put the combined total at approximately 17 million mines buried across Libya and Egypt during the conflict. Rommel's defensive barrier at El Alamein, a structure that British military historians called the Devil's Garden, was a belt 5 kilometers deep and 65 kilometers wide, containing an estimated 500,000 mines of multiple types, including the German Tellermine 42, the British Mike 2 anti-tank mine, and the Italian B4 anti-personnel device. The desert is a merciless preservative. There is no moisture to corrode metal casings at the rate that European soil would. There is no frost to crack fuse housings. There are no root systems to shift pressure plates. A mine laid in 1942 in the Libyan sand can be in nearly identical mechanical condition to the day it was buried. The Egyptian government has estimated that clearing the El Alamein area alone would cost in the region of $30 billion and take decades of continuous work. That is one battlefield in one country. The Halo Trust and other clearance organizations operating in Libya have documented more than 1,000 civilian casualties from landmines in the country between 2011 and 2023. A significant portion of those devices are not recent. They predate the families that stepped on them by 80 years. They predate the countries those families live in. Rommel's engineers built the Devil's Garden to stop a British advance that succeeded 80 years ago. The British advance succeeded. The minefield did not stop. It is still there, and in the Libyan desert, preserved by the same dry heat that mummifies everything, it is still working. Number 2, the Bouncing Betty. In the spring of 1944, American infantry units fighting northward through Italy began filing after-action reports that described something their training had not fully prepared them for. The mines they stepped on were not staying in the ground. They were coming up. The device responsible was the Shrapnel Mine 35, developed by Germany and in production since 1935, with approximately 1.9 million units manufactured by the war's end. Allied soldiers gave it a name that has outlasted almost every other piece of WWII equipment vocabulary: the Bouncing Betty. The mechanism was engineered with a precise, brutal logic. A pressure plate or tripwire triggered a small propellant charge that launched the mine body upward to between 0.5 meter and 1.5 meters, roughly waist height on an adult male soldier, before the primary fragmentation charge detonated, releasing 350 steel balls and fragments of scrap metal in a lethal radius of 20 to 30 meters and a wounding radius of up to 140 meters. The waist height detonation was not accidental. German ordnance engineers calculated that infantry caught in the open could potentially survive a ground-level blast by dropping flat. Waist height meant the fragmentation pattern targeted the groin and abdomen. The design objective was not to kill cleanly and quickly. It was to incapacitate, to produce wounded soldiers requiring evacuation and medical resources rather than dead soldiers who could simply be left. It was an engineering approach to attrition. 2. Post-war clearance teams found S-mines across France, Italy, the Eastern Front, and North Africa. They are still being found. In France and Italy, devices have been confirmed in recent years during agricultural and infrastructure work. In Ukraine, where the soil of former Eastern Front battlefields already contained S-mines from 1941 to 1945, modern bounding mines descended directly from the Bouncing Betty's design are now being laid in the same ground. WWII era originals and their 21st century descendants are active in the same field simultaneously. The S-mine's design is nearly 90 years old. The principle it established, the jump, the height, the fragmentation pattern, has been reproduced in mines manufactured and deployed by dozens of countries in every decade since. The engineer who designed the original is long dead. The design never stopped killing because the design was too effective to abandon. Number 1. The anti-tank mine. Ahmed was 12 years old. He was moving through open ground near his village outside Misrata, Libya, on a morning in 2022, on ground that generations of his family had walked across, ground that bore no visible sign of anything wrong. He stepped on something the size of a dinner plate, buried shallow under the sand, and the next thing anyone knew was the sound. He survived. He lost his left leg above the knee. The device that took it had been in the ground for approximately 80 years. It had been put there by an army that no longer existed, in a war that had ended before his parents were born, to stop a tank. The anti-tank mine is the most systematically lethal legacy of the Second World War. The German Tellermine series, the Soviet TM-41, and the American M1 anti-tank mine were all designed to carry between 5 and 9 kilograms of TNT, calibrated to the pressure required to destroy a vehicle weighing several tons. The Tellermine 42 required between 90 and 180 kilograms of trigger pressure when new. After decades of soil compaction, temperature cycling, and internal corrosion, that threshold can degrade significantly, to the point where the weight of a child is sufficient. The mine does not know the war is over. The mine does not know anything. It simply waits for the right pressure. The International Campaign to Ban Landmines, in its 2023 Landmine Monitor report, recorded 4,110 casualties from landmines and explosive remnants of war in 2022. 85% were civilians. 42% were children. These numbers do not capture every case. In heavily contaminated regions of Libya, Egypt, Angola, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, reporting infrastructure is incomplete, and casualty figures are almost certainly higher than what reaches international databases. Cambodia and Laos contain WWII-era Japanese ordnance, alongside decades of subsequent contamination, layers of different wars compressed into the same soil. The Ottawa Treaty, signed in 1997 and ratified by 164 states, banned the production, transfer, and use of anti-personnel landmines. The United States, Russia, and China have not signed it. Global annual expenditure on mine clearance runs to approximately $600 million. The Halo Trust and Mines Advisory Group, two of the largest demining organizations in the world, project that the most heavily contaminated nations will not achieve mine-free status until 2050 at the earliest. Some estimates extend beyond 2060. The mines being cleared in Libya today were placed there by the Africa Corps. The mines being cleared in Laos were placed there during conflicts that ended 50 years ago. The mines being cleared in Cambodia predate the independence of the country doing the clearing. Every year, the world spends $600 million trying to undo what cost almost nothing to put in the ground. The engineers who designed these devices calculated trigger pressure, explosive yield, and fragmentation radius with careful, methodical precision. They designed weapons to stop armies. They did not design them to stop eventually. They built them to last. And the one thing they built perfectly, in every theater, in every climate, across every decade since the war ended, is exactly that. Ahmed is 12 years old, and he is learning to walk on a prosthetic limb in a city that was not a battlefield, on a continent where the war has been over for 80 years. Because somewhere beneath the sand, a device that was engineered to kill a tank found him first, and it worked exactly as designed. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.